one of the things that God's kind of worked through in my healing process is understanding that it's not just that your mom wasn't there, because you go through a traumatic situation, you fall down and skin your knee, whatever it is, and your mom isn't there, that can leave a traumatic spot in your life, right? To go, man, I really needed my mom and she wasn't there for whatever reason. When your mom is the one that's causing the hurt, even though in your mind as a child it all gets twisted up, that becomes even more difficult.
In all of the good times and even the trials, through tears and through laughter, yeah, I know that I'll smile when I think of you. Smile for the things you do. Smile, God gave me you. You are a reason I smile.
This is Behind Our Smiles.
Pursuing connection.
And finding joy.
Even in the struggle.
And welcome back to another episode of the Behind Our Smiles podcast. We are Joe and Tara Buchanan.
Can we just skip Mother's Day?
We are so glad that you're hanging out with us. We love spending time with you. And speaking of skip, our family loves Uno. And the crazier the rules, I guess there's some crazy rules online, and we try to play by those sometimes because our kids have a lot of fun with it. But one of our favorite cards is the skip card, because whenever you want to or feel the need to, or the other person has Uno or whatever the case is, you can literally just skip them.
Right. A skip card is good to have. And there are times that we wanted to skip over certain things.
Yes.
And so that's where I know from living with Joe for the many years that I have, that if he had a skip card in his hand right about now, the middle of April, he'd say, can we skip over that part? And a lot of it is, when it comes to Mother's Day, skipping over the extra hallmarkization of the holiday and all the talk about moms and how wonderful they are. And have you remembered your mothers this week or this day? And there's a lot of emphasis in our culture about, honoring moms this time of year as we should be. Yeah,
there's a lot of pressure, and there are a lot of great moms. And if you are a great mom, happy Mother's Day. I'm really grateful that and hope that you will be celebrated. And Tara, you are a fantastic mom, so you deserve to be celebrated. We want to celebrate that. But when you turn on the television or
social media
or everywhere, and you're in the Walgreens or wherever, and you see all this stuff pointing toward a perfect mom. If you didn't have a perfect mom, or your relationship with your mom is not quite right, then it can make you feel like something's wrong with you.
Right. You don't resonate with that feeling. And, for me, Joe, the way I grew up, there was nothing weird about Mother's Day, and there was no reason to want to skip it. Like, I grew up with a great mom, and she cared for me and loved me, and I could spend an episode kind of giving you great memories. And I remember Mother's Day making the crafts at Sunday school for her and doing something special. So there was that culture shock when we got married, and going, oh, he does not have the same memories as I do. Like, there was just a whole different dynamic from what you saw, because again, you saw on TV or the ads, these beautiful picturesque pictures of moms, which honestly are not real in anyone's life. Right. Like, no one's that good of a mom, me included. And I know for you, it just created a whole different feeling in you, Joe. I'm not sure how you describe those feelings of when you see that picture perfect memory of a mom.
Well, I think the first place that I typically will go is that there's something wrong with me. Because we've often heard the phrase, he's got a face that only a mom can love, or some things like that. And so if you grow up feeling your mom didn't love you, then whose fault is that, right? And so as I kind of turn that inward on myself to say, it must be my fault. There must be something wrong with me. I couldn't make it work, or I was not a good enough kid, or these types of things. So those are some of the feelings that
right, because a mom in our version of life, and then obviously even what God would ask mom to do, is this picture of selfless love, right? Is this pouring out of yourself to benefit your child, to take care of your child for any reason? Like you said, only a mother can love, or the mother's love is just, it is idolized to see this person who can love so well. And it's obviously my goal as a mom. But it's funny how when you first kind of would tell that to me, whenever we had these conversations, Joe, it was very foreign to me, because I'm like, why would you think it's you? Like, it's not something's wrong with you. Something wrong was with how you were mothered, like clearly. But it's interesting how it took you a long time to say, it wasn't me. Someone else has wronged me. Someone else did violate their obligation to take care of you.
And I think I was well into my adulthood before I really began to understand what that looked like. And even to this day, I still go, you'll correct me sometimes because I'll be like, yeah, but I could have handled that differently. You're like, Joe, you were 6.
Right.
How could you have handled that differently?
Right.
But I think children, and we've seen it in our own kids, and having kids has brought a lot of healing too, because I look at my kids and I go, goodness gracious, anyone treating that, if they had parents that treated them in the way that I was treated, there's no way that any rationally minded person on the planet would say it was their fault.
Right.
And so it's helped me to kind of come back to that and go, okay, I could take a deep breath and say that wasn't my fault. It doesn't change the fact that there is real aftermath of traumatic events. There's real aftermath of the abuse that I sustained that I still have to work through and am still working through. But help, God kind of working that healing process to help me come to grips with the idea that maybe it really wasn't my fault, that whatever I did wrong, it didn't warrant that.
Right.
That has helped a lot.
It's interesting too, because as an adult right now, you can kind of put words to those feelings. But Joe, can you think of a time what you felt as a kid? I mean, depending on how back you go, how far back you go. So obviously in your early childhood, you were taken out of your mother's home due to abuse, put into foster care, further abused. And so you never really understood what the ideal was. It wasn't like you had the ideal and then you lost it. Do you remember that first feeling when you kind of go, this doesn't feel the way I want to feel in terms of your relationship with your mother?
Well, I think it was that way pretty much all along. I definitely didn't want it. I remember in my earliest memories being in foster care and just wishing that my mom would come get me, or dreaming or fantasizing about the idea that she was standing outside the door, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, but there are times when mom was supposed to come visit me and she never showed up, and those types of things. So I always internalize that as in, if I had been a better kid, or if I had only done this differently, or maybe I could have told her this one more time or not said that. And you can drive yourself absolutely crazy working those things over in your head. And so I think for me, especially if I go back to my childhood, a lot of it was largely internalized, like, what could I have done better, or what I should have done better. I just wish my mom was here.
It's interesting because, again, I don't think you had the words at the time for that. It's not like you would have said that. And this is so interesting to me, again, Joe, and have not experienced this, but many times, let's say your mom had come to get you for some visit that she was able to have, that there would be abuse involved in there.
Right.
So it wasn't like you were just going to be going to the carnival and having this wonderful time, that a lot of times going back with your mom would mean bad things, but there was still that, again, innate desire to say, I want to have her love, right?
Yeah, even even when I began to understand what really was done to me, I still, because I think in our mind's eye too, the people that we want to be with are like they're not bending, they're bending to our will, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of behaving in a way that we want them to behave. So I think being with my mom and having my mom want me to be with her probably trumped a lot of the fear, because there was legitimate fear too. There were also, my mom was really, really poor. And so in the times that I was with my mom, there were times that we didn't eat, for instance. There were times that bled into other things. So I remember being really, really hungry as a child, and not even being able to identify that that's really what was happening, but just being very uncomfortable. And there were times, I'm sure, that my mom couldn't afford to feed us, but there were other times that I think that was purposely withheld from us because of the things that my mom was dealing with.
At least that was told to you in some way. I think that, and we talk about this idea that the things that your mom said to you, the things that mothers say to you, become a very loud voice. And so, like you were saying, if I'd been better, that this wouldn't happen to me. And that's sometimes because the different mom figures in your life, whether it be your mom or your foster mom, would tell you those things. If you are better, right, you can earn
or
food.
It's your fault.
Right.
You did this is why. And I think going back a little bit to childhood, there were other times when I was with my mom under the care of my mom, and she would disappear for long periods of time. And I know it was at least a night and a day. And I remember, distinctive memories. I had a younger brother who was a year younger. And I'll give you a quick example. He had locked himself. We lived in this trailer, and he had locked himself in the bathroom and couldn't get out. And he was screaming, and I couldn't get him out. And I was just like, Mom, where are you? I need you. And that happened so much. Or we would be locked in a closet while things were, she was gone. And so it'd be like, man, when is she coming home? It's just that kind of desperateness of just wanting your mom to come rescue you, right? If she were here, then things would be different.
There's that rescue. And I think I learned so much more about understanding perhaps what your story was like, Joe. I know when I had my babies, and how much as a parent, you're trying to figure out how do you be the perfect mom, right? And how do you take care of your kids so that they never have any issues? There's no way to do that. But the idea of the kids need to learn that their needs will be met. It's like this basic human thing that when they cry, someone picks them up. When they're hungry, they get fed. When they're wet, they get changed. Like in those simple things that we do every day as parents is when they're tiny newborn babies, is like establishing in them then this trust concept that, hey, when you have a need, this adult's going to meet your need. And I thought, again, that's common sense 101. I became a mom. If my child has a need, I should meet it, right? And then thinking about what you went through, Joe, and saying, okay, you did not have that experience at all, right? That when you had a need, it was not met, a need for safety, a need for food. And I know that's something that everyone would say did affect you all the way through your life in adulthood.
It still shows up today.
Right. It's such a basic need.
I think looking back, there was a lot of physical abuse. I'm blind in one eye because of some of the abuse and stuff that happened. But I think the stuff that has stuck with me and the stuff that impacts me even to this day had nothing to do with the physical side of the abuse. It was the neglect. It was the lack of need being met, even though I didn't know that at the time, didn't know how to articulate any of that. It was that lack of trust. And even it took me a long, long time, and I'm still getting there, to be able to trust God at a high level because of that was broken so early on. And it really did take me a long time to even be able to put words to that, to understand. And in our relationship too, just learning to really be able to trust you as fully as I need to.
Right, to say,
been really tough.
I think that's been a lifelong process. I've seen in you that, hey, Tara, I have a need. Can you meet it? Right? Like that was a big step for you. And I know in you generally, Joe, you're a very kind person. You're a very generous person. You're a very giving person. But I know I see, and underneath the surface is this concept of going, my needs don't matter, right? It's almost like the concept that everyone else's needs matter. And I think I had to work on you over the years to go, it's okay if, you have a need and it needs to be met. It's like, well, no, everyone else will eat, right? And I don't have to eat. It's like, no, you have to eat too. And different things like that would show up. And I was like, you could be a little bit taking care of the things that are important to you too. But I think that does go back to your childhood, not having that person that says, just relax, I'll take care of it. It's like, no, you couldn't relax and they weren't going to take care of it.
And I think too, no, I appreciate that. I think too, you don't have to have these kind of traumatic events to have an unhealthy relationship with your mom growing up to still experience a weirdness or a hardship or just uncomfortableness, if we will, around Mother's Day when you begin to see, because again, we all want to believe that moms as a whole are great. We all want to believe in our culture.
I think most are.
Yeah,
right.
And I do. And I've met some tremendous, incredible people who are fantastic moms to their children.
And so many times mothers are under-celebrated and underappreciated.
Yes.
So to go above and beyond is sometimes warranted.
But again, if you're in church with a mom who's doing a fantastic job, her kids are turning out great, or whatever you would put on that to measure that success, then how do you reconcile? How do you come to grips with the fact that that's not what you experience? And I know that life isn't fair and all of those things, but it's really, really difficult sometimes to get your head wrapped around the power of those emotions, to understand why they surface when they do, and to understand exactly what they mean.
Well, and I think I see in you too, and it was heavier obviously as a child when you were completely still in it, just the desire for that unconditional love, right? Is there someone out there that loves me unconditionally? And I think in time, as you've healed, you realized, okay, this person in my life, whatever mother figures in your life, and you had several mother figures, this is not going to be the source of that unconditional love. But because I think having a mom is a basic human need, we'll put it in the category as, having food, like it's important, that desire was really stronger at other times in your life to say, if I just had, right, a mother's love, that kind of love that I see on TV, wow, what a hole that would fill in my life. And along the way to say, again, to reconcile that I didn't get that. And you can't, it's kind of too late to get it now, right? With what you wanted at 5 years old or 8 years old or 13 or 15, just to say, but that desire is still there, right? And it's not a bad desire.
Right.
It's just putting it in its proper place to say, what do you do with that desire to say, I wish I had that, right? When you see other families that had these perfect, you looked at my family and said like, wow, your mom loves you and she does this for you and does that for you and she encourages you and they cheer you on and they're there for you when things are hard. I wish I had that. How have you kind of reconciled with that?
Well, and I think it becomes, I don't know if this is childish thinking or whatever, but when you see it displayed in such a healthy and spectacular way, it really is glaring how much you lost. Like as a child, like we talked about, I don't even know if I knew how much I lost. I don't even think I knew how much I lost until I started to meet people in my life who were getting it right. Then I began to go, it was healing because I go, okay, that wasn't normal.
That wasn't normal, right?
Right. There was something wrong there, but it also is like, oh man. And I think also one of the things that I've had that God's kind of worked through in my healing process is understanding that it's not just that your mom wasn't there, because you go through a traumatic situation, you fall down and skin your knee, whatever it is, and your mom isn't there, that can leave a traumatic spot in your life, right? To go, man, I really needed my mom and she wasn't there for whatever reason. When your mom is the one that's behind the hurt, is causing the hurt, and there's no way she can rescue you because she's the one causing the hurt, even though in your mind as a child, it all gets twisted up. I think that becomes even more difficult.
Right. And we haven't mentioned, but it's obvious too, Joe, just as we kind of say that you struggle with your mother wound the most. Like for some reason, the time I've known you, the lack of mothering for you far out eclipses lack of fathering. Because let's be honest, you didn't have a father that protected you and loved you conditionally as well. I mean, and they a lot of in and out of your life and abandonment and everything. But it's interesting though, like you said, the person who's supposed to protect you, it's not like even dad could protect you from mom or mom protected you from dad. And in fact, you took on the role of the protector to protect your brother in the only way that you could as a 6-year-old or as a 10-year-old. But it's just interesting how certain that desire and those wounds just do hang on for a while because they are so deep.
They do, and they show up in the weirdest places, right? They're triggered by the weirdest things, and of course, this time of year, they're triggered in more so than normal or whatever. But I think where it's kind of surfaced in our relationship and in my life is one of the areas that I see it is in our kids, and like one of the things that I have a very short patience with is when the kids are not respectful to you, or and they're being normal kids. Right. Our kids aren't like outwardly disrespectful in any way like that, although they are normal kids. But I am like, wait a minute, because in my brain it's going, you have no idea how incredible you have it. And you are complaining over this? Are you kidding me? And you have helped me to take that step back and say, yes, you're right. We cannot tolerate that behavior. Your kids cannot be outwardly disrespectful toward their parents. However, understanding that they are also just processing their kids, and it's okay if they're not 1,000% grateful every moment of every day.
Well, I think you've also mentioned before that like, even if they are disrespectful and even if they really cross the line, we still love them. Right. We're still here. We deal with it. Whereas you're kind of saying to yourself, if I pulled that kind of situation with some of my mother figures in my life, I could have gotten punished in a brutal, physical, very extreme, criminal kind of way. For us, we're just going to deal with it, have a talking with them, send them to their room, whatever we, handle it with. And to say, man, our kids can make mistakes and they fall short and they don't do what they're supposed to do. And yet we deal with it. We don't throw them on the street, lock them out of the house, or, whatever those kind of things happen. And to say, hey, this is to realize that, wait a minute, I didn't get that same fair treatment that I could have gotten.
I think also what makes my story more complicated and a little bit more difficult is the way that it was twofold. So I had my childhood, my early years, dealt with a very traumatic, abusive situation with my mom, neglect, abandonment, all of those things. And then I go through foster care, deal with there was a lot of abusive situations in foster care and with my, just being with my mom here, being with my dad here, all that.
Instability, right?
Instability. But then I'm adopted and things are supposed to be promised to be perfect.
Right.
And I think I did bring in a major amount of hurt into that adoptive relationship. I was 10 years old at the time. I had all of this history in my past, so I know I wasn't the quote unquote perfect child by any stretch.
Which doesn't matter.
But the things that happened under the watch of that home further confirmed some of the things that I believed about myself. The abuse, there's a lot of the abuse continued, a lot of not so great things happened, and eventual flat out, not just abandonment, but complete rejection.
Right.
Like you're not to the level of you're not my son.
Well, going back to what we just said, though, I know that at 10, right, part of you is saying, if only I had, right, I want to be loved unconditionally and have that security and safety from a mom. But I know part of you was not ready yet either, right, to say, do I trust you, right? And so you naturally, as a 10-year-old, subconsciously are going, I want a mom, but I'm not ready to really trust
and I
you
think,
as my mom figure.
I think this is not the podcast to go into deep detail here because we're talking about Mother's Day, but I think part of what happened there was when you adopt someone and you rescue someone, you expect a certain reaction from them.
We should be grateful.
Right. And I was grateful, but I didn't know.
You're 10 years old.
I didn't know what to be grateful for. I didn't really believe it was forever, number one. I didn't really believe that they were going to love me in the way that I was told that this was going to be different. I mean, I remember going out of my last foster home, getting on an airplane and flying to a different city and thinking and all I had was the clothes on my back and not knowing what the future held. And it's nobody's fault on this level because looking back at how young everybody was that was involved,
and
we were all just learning,
incompetent structures, and
that's excusable, really. I think when you start to get into this idea of the abuse that happened after that, and like for instance, I never did drugs. I never snuck out of the house. I didn't do the things that typical teenagers
although that
did.
would
I didn't
be
party.
Understandable on a level of kids who've been through tough things.
It's not like I was. I know that I talked back to my parents, and I know that I was not always easy to live with.
We all have our bad attitudes, right?
I was dealing with some very heavy things. No excuse. I know that I wasn't the easiest teenage child to raise. But when your parents tell you it's your behavior is the reason
I'm abusing you, that
they're treating you in this way, and the way and the reason that they flat out abandon and reject you, that's where that further instilled or further confirmed in me the things that I already believed about myself.
It's me, right? It's the problem is me.
The thing that's really disappointing is I feel like during those years, my teenage years, was an opportunity for real healing to happen, and it only further made things worse.
Right,
really.
and I think that's why looking at your journey of healing, we kind of go, it wasn't just a childhood wound, but also a teenage wound, an almost young man wound with your mother, that it's like, yeah, this takes time to heal from, right? When you look at those kind of, 1-2 punches in your life.
The things that happened later in my teen years, as you know, Tara, are some of the things that are hardest to work through. Those were the things that have, yes, my childhood impacts me. There's no doubt about it. But it's the things that happen in my teen years that are the deepest source of pain for me when I am dealing. And when Mother's Day rolls around, it's like, Joe, not only was your mom not good to you, your original birth mom, and we can go into other reasons. We're going to get to that in a second of why I don't blame her. But not only that, but you had multiple opportunities to have a mom love and care for you, and you failed at every one of them. You even had a mom who said, I'm going to adopt you and I'm going to love you for the rest of your life, regardless of what you've been through. Just because others saw this in you, I don't. That's my thinking, by the way. And yet they still couldn't make it work. And I lived in that adoptive home for less than 17 years, or less than 7 years. So, I mean,
short burn.
Right. It's absolutely. So how, as a child, how are you supposed to interpret that?
And teenagers alone, adolescents, still struggle with self-esteem and growing up and all those normal growing up feelings. And then to have that clash of what's going on here. And I think, we can look back now and see how our healing process has gone. And part of it is acknowledging those feelings and us talking together too, going, what are you feeling right now? And I'm hearing it in your voice now. You're like, whoa, what just happened? And I think that's for talking about how have found healing and how God has just transformed your experience, Joe, from being so much pain to a real joy in the pain, has been able to name those feelings and talk about what has happened to you. And for you, it could be a good friend, it could be counseling, but somewhere where you're able to come out and say, these are the things that happened. This is exactly what I was feeling.
And everybody's story is different. And one of the things that I've had friends through the years say, well, yeah, but my story's not you know what I mean? I didn't have it as bad, or quote unquote, or almost like they feel guilty for dealing with things because they didn't have the same experience. And that should never be the case. Any traumatic. And by the way, I feel like, Tara, you and I have done a great job raising our kids, but guess what? They're going to have scars because we are all human beings. We're never going to get it perfect. And it's a continual day of intentional action to make sure that we're okay, to make sure that forgiveness is being extended, to make sure that we're saying we're sorry. But I know I have regrets as a dad. There were times when I didn't handle things right. So my kids are going to have scars. So no matter what we've come through, it doesn't matter if someone's been through something more than us. We all carry hurt that we have to work through, and we have to surrender to God.
So what else have you been, Joe, for you? What else has been part of, I know for us, part of it's been this process of talking together. What else for you has allowed you from being, so completely devastated and broken and open bleeding wounds, from let's say 30, 40 years ago to now where you still want to skip Mother's Day in actuality, but in reality, you survive. I mean, we don't have to, stop our lives and go into a cave. You get through it in a healthier way than you did, let's say 20 years ago. I
appreciate that. And I think part of it is it took time. And I think this is just human nature too. I think on some level, we sometimes with the culture that we live in, everything's fast, right? We have instant gratification on so many things that I think some of us are like, man, we should have 20 years of experience in 1 year. And that doesn't work. And so I think for us, we had to be more intentional going into our marriage to understand that there were some real things that we were going to have to work through. And I think it just took time for me to really learn how to trust you. I think that took time. So those were things that were very helpful. I think also some things that God led me through in the healing process, like not blaming. I think that's the the tendency is to want to blame and say, hey, I'm not succeeding in my life the way God wants me to because look what they did to me. And God very early on in my healing process just made it very clear. And that was with some really godly people in my life. You cannot make a living blaming others. You cannot live your life. You're not going to go anywhere. You're going to stall out. And so, and then also understanding, but sometimes we can just choose not to blame, but we can also seek understanding and understanding that my mom had some very major health issues or mental health issues that made it very, very difficult for her to be a mom. She was a teenager when I was born and never, she was abused growing up. So understanding helped a lot in that process, but I think not blaming was a big part of it. Also getting to a place where I knew I was loved. And I think I've shared it before in this podcast.
And just to clarify, you're saying like, okay, the major wound in your life, and if you can encapsulate it in one word is, again, the one person in my life who should show me a level of unconditional love has failed completely, and even future people in my life. So to say, I know my identity is I'm not loved, right? I'm the one kid whose mother doesn't love him. So I think that was the primary wound that God had to work in you to say, okay, it's true, your mother didn't love you, right? in a sense, the way she should have. But it does not mean that Joe Buchanan is not loved.
Right. And God, I really thought God tolerated me. I accepted Christ when I was 15.
That's all you saw, right?
Right. And I wanted to believe he loved me, but I couldn't get my head wrapped around it. I just couldn't. No matter how many times I heard it, no matter how many Bible verses I read.
It's a foreign concept for you. It's
I
like
knew
speaking
God
a different
saved
language.
me, but I thought it was like, honestly, it was like this. Oh, shoot. He found out. Joe now knows how to get saved. I have to save him. And I really, really thought tolerate is the best word to pick, because I really thought God tolerated me, and I tried to stay out of his way, because if he didn't see me, then he wouldn't be annoyed with me. And I could and it was very lonely, by the way. And I wanted so desperately, I love God. I really was falling in love with God, and I really wanted to love him. And I didn't know how to get there. And I remember I was driving over to your house. I just want to share, I know we probably shared the story before, but this was a huge, huge turning point for me. And this is why I do what I do in my ministry. And this is why I want everybody to have this experience. But I was driving over to your house, Tara, and I was just starting to date you. And you were way out of my league, honestly, if I can just say that. In my mind, there were so many things about you. In other words, I could list them, and we could be at this podcast all day, but I'll just say this. If anyone on the planet were special to God, I knew it was you, Tara. I knew that Tara was special to God. And so I'm driving over to her house, and God's reminding me of all these things that I believe in my mind that give value to why you're special to God. And I'm having this conversation, I'm getting defensive because I really believe what's happening. This is not audible, by the way, it's all in my heart. But I believe what's happening is God's going to say to me, if you ever hurt this girl, you're going to have to deal with me. And I was getting really defensive. I was like, God, I know. And finally, I felt this impression on my heart. It wasn't audible, but it was as clear as the day is long. You know how I feel about her, right? And there was a sternness in how I was feeling it. And I said, yes, God, out loud while I'm driving. I said, yes, God, I know how you feel about her. And I was about to say, please don't let me hurt her, because I don't want to have to deal with you. And before I could even get those words out, my heart was so clear that day. God says, that's how I feel about you and Joe. And I had to pull the car over, because I remember saying, like, really, God, is that you? And here's how I know over the years that was definitely God, because my flesh would have gone the opposite way. My flesh would have said, if you ever hurt that girl, you'll have to deal with me. That's what I believed through my core of who I was. You were special to God. I had no business in your life. And if God allowed it, I better be careful. That's what I believed. And God turned everything on a dime that day and spoke his love to me in a way that was undeniable. It comes back to me all the time. I'm reminded of that day when God wants to remind me that he loves me. So that day, the whole trajectory changed. That's when I really believe healing started to there was healing that happened.
No, but these are all just steps in the long process. And I think there's times we have to go back to those steps again. But I think like you said, your brain was going, I'm the one who's not good enough. Everyone else is loved and whatever. But it goes back to, again, the role of a mother's voice in our lives can be so strong and so loud. And I know even to this day, those voices are still in your head. And you're like, shut up. That's not, that, because think about the things that you've had mothers literally say to you, right? Like not imply or not innuendo, but just say,
you are not good enough.
Right. You will
never be good enough. You're a piece of this. You're that.
You're a problem. Right. You need to, and so to have God interrupt that and go, listen, God's going to be the loudest voice in your life. That had to be the loudest voice to say whatever anyone has said about me, mother, father, anybody in your life, that is the loudest voice to say, no, God's word is the final word on your life. You are loved, you are precious, you are chosen, you've been, died for by God, by Jesus, because of your value. And it's like, it's hard to wrap our minds around that.
Up to that moment in my life, and I was almost 21 years old, I can honestly say I had never felt loved a day in my life. It doesn't mean I wasn't loved. I had never, ever felt loved, and I never felt significant, ever. And in that moment, now I still struggle sometimes, even to this day, I struggle with significance. I struggle with trying not to have to always earn my love, making sure that it's okay to say that my needs are okay, not just everybody else's. But I think when that day, I felt significant for the very first time, and I felt love for the very first time. And it is a powerful thing.
And the thing is, too, Joe, you could look back and say, obviously, in your home life, we could pretty much say you were not loved. And there definitely were people in your life that had shown you love. There was those moments of grace,
right?
Little people here, and there who managed to show you love in a time when you didn't have it. But like you said, your brain was like almost not even wired to receive it. So there are definitely people in our life that you could list off to say, man, they showed me love at a time that I had none, but you couldn't receive it. And it's really awesome that your first time was saying, hey, the love that matters most is going to be God's love, only because it is the only thing you can depend on.
And we're not tolerated. We are loved. Exactly. And I think, so part of that was reconciling this idea. And this was really important. This was a long one. This was really important. And it took a long time. So that began that process. That was the moment that began it. And again, the work that he started in us is not completed. So this is going to be a lifelong process. But reconciling this idea that even in our suffering, even when we're suffering, it does not mean that God doesn't love us.
That's been so difficult.
Because it's hard to imagine this God who's in charge of everything
He loves us so much.
Would allow these things to happen,
and then reconciling, saying, but why did these things happen?
Right. And why do they happen to me?
And why did they happen again?
If you say you love me, God, how in the world? And I didn't even understand the depth of that twisted up in my head to figure all that out.
I mean, it's one of the largest questions we'll ever ask as humans. So we're not going to really attempt
and I still don't have the exact answer
that, but I think to wrestle with it, to still say, I'm going to believe, mostly that and God had never forsaken me, even in the moments where, let's say, I wasn't rescued out of that situation or out of that pain, that he really was with you the whole time.
In fact, I can look back and I can see evidence where God went enough, where God stepped in and protected. For instance, I mentioned earlier that I'm blind in my left eye. Every eye doctor I've ever seen says the blow that caused that damage should have ended my life. God said enough. He stepped in and he intervened. You couldn't see it at that point in my life, and I'm still God's revealing
and random
things.
people in your story who just came a little bit of balm, to the wound, and just in understanding the role even of the Holy Spirit, right? That Jesus said, I'm going to send you the Holy Spirit. He's going to be with you. And I love that one little line. It said, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. That God has never, ever left us. And even if, Joe, you've been orphaned by your physical parents, right? There's no other way to describe you except to say you were orphaned. But God has not left us as orphans. That's not your identity anymore. Joe's not an orphan. He's a child of God who's loved and valued beyond measure, no matter what people say about him.
Right. And even I once said, I'm just a sinner. And they're like, no, you're not. You're a child of God who sins, right? We do have sin in our lives and God forgives us. But to identify this idea that my identity is wrapped up in who God is, not who I am. And I think forgiveness, just to kind of close out your question, Tara, I couldn't answer that question without coming back to forgiveness. For me, it was a key ingredient. I am not here today with you. I don't even know where I'm at without following God's obedience. And we talked about it a few episodes ago, so
that's
I don't want to.
22. Yeah, episode 22, we talked more in depth about.
I don't want to go into detail now, but just know that without forgiveness, there's no way any of this other stuff happens. Forgiveness was key. And forgiveness is really what brought forth understanding that my mom had some mental health issues, that there were things way beyond her control even. Now, she didn't respond favorably or the right way, but I see God, when I see the way God looks at her, he looks at her with empathy, love, and grace. And if God loves her, then who am I to say I won't? And understanding that I can't be in the same room with her. I can't have a relationship with her. Right. There are boundaries that have to be put in place, but I'm going to forgive. And then, so I think forgiveness is huge.
Well, what I've seen in your life, Joe, too, in the years we've been together too, is these different steps of, reconciling your suffering and understanding your love and understanding whose voice is the loudest and forgiveness and all those things. It is like a cycle of things you're continually working on. It's not like, bam, I got that done, we move on. I feel like every season, and it's even like the Mother's Day season, sometimes for you is a trigger to say, do I need to work on some of these things, right? What part of my life and my heart is not submitted to God in these areas if I'm still feeling a little bit off here? So I feel like as much as I know it's a hard holiday for you, it is help us to get our hearts back on track. And we have a lot more to say about this. This is like one of those.
Yeah, that's why we have a two-part.
We're still going. So next week, we're going to kind of talk about the clash that happened with the same topic as I became a mother and I went head first into motherhood. And that kind of crazy experience that we had along the way. Yeah. Joe, thank you so much for sharing with us. I know this is not your favorite topic to share about, but I know that you are not alone and that this is unfortunately a very common experience for many people, just to have such brokenness in their relationships with their mother, family, and all the complication that it brings, that rarely is anybody truly the Hallmark family, that everything is always perfect with your mom.
Yeah. And I do want to just say this before we go. Maybe your experience is different than mine, but there's still stuff there that makes this a very difficult time of year.
There's lots of reasons.
Just number one, there's nothing inherently wrong with you, right? I mean, that took me a long time to understand.
As a person.
You're not alone. These are struggles that so many of us have, but when we're in church on a Sunday morning on Mother's Day and you look around, you think everybody else has it really well together because there's smiles on their face, they're dressed well, they look like they have it together. But to understand that, I think for me to begin to understand that I wasn't alone made a huge difference in going, okay, there are others who also struggle with this. There are also others who are triggered by this. And also that there's hope. That for me, there's a really strong chance that I will never have a healthy relationship with my mom this side of heaven. But we do know we serve a God who will make it right. It will be made right in one way or another. And there will come a day when anything worth making sense will make sense, and we will be completely healed. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful to have spent time with you. We'd love to connect with you, and if we can pray for you, we'd love to do that as well. There's a couple of different ways to connect.
Yeah, we'd love to find you on Facebook or at Behind Our Smiles, and we're on Instagram at Behind Our Smiles Pod. We also love your 5-star ratings, and reviews are always an encouragement, and they help people to find us. If this episode has been a blessing to you, please share it with a friend.
Yeah. So thank you again so much.